In Fullmetal Alchemist, a manga by writer and illustrator Hiromu Arakawa, the main characters invite us to question what it means to be human. Trying to define what it means to be human is one of the central conflicts of the series. Does the definition of human end with the chemical components, as listed dispassionately by the protagonist Edward Elric, or does it extend to something broader and less substantial, such as with the case of his brother, Alphonse, who exists as just a soul? The definition of human is balanced between each new case of supernatural they meet: humanoid chimera, homunculi, beings existing as just souls, and a living philosopher's stone. Constantly, the characters are forced to engage with this question of what is human, and react accordingly, or else risk committing a crime such as murder. For the sake of continuity and simplicity, I will only be discussing the manga in this video since both anime adaptations stray from the source material, one more so than the other. I will also limit my discussion when possible to the events of the first 6 volumes. As a quick recap for those who are new to the series, or for those who haven't read it in a while, Fullmetal Alchemist takes place in Amestris, which is a military-run country. In the series, characters use alchemy, which to outside viewers looks like magic, except that those who practice it call it a science. Since it is a science, those who use it are forced to adhere to a strict set of laws. These laws are summed up as the law of equivalent exchange. Essentially, it is the scientific technique of understanding the structure of matter, decomposing it, and then reconstructing it. Only one thing can be created from something else of a certain mass. This is the principle of equivalent exchange. There are 2 main tenets for alchemists: do not create gold and do not create humans. It is the last taboo that the Elric brothers, Edward and Alphonse, break. After the death of their mother, the Elric brothers attempt to use alchemy to bring her back. This causes the younger brother, Alphonse, to lose his entire body, and the elder brother, Edward, to lose his leg. In order to save Alphonse, Edward sacrifices his arm as well. This allows him to transmute Alphonse's soul into a suit of armor, giving his soul a physical form. After receiving auto-male prosthetics, Edward decides to join the military in order to search for the legendary Philosopher's Stone, which is said to be a miracle substance that can allow alchemists to bypass the law of equivalent exchange. With the stone, the brothers hope to restore their bodies. Their plans change, though, after they discover that the stone is created through the sacrifice of human life, which causes them to question alchemy and whether it should be used at all. Alchemy becomes the catalyst that allows characters to look retrospectively at their perspective on humanity and their moral compass. This was intentional. As Arakawa explains, I was more attracted to the philosophical aspects of the Philosopher's Stone than the practical ones. Essentially, Fullmetal Alchemist offers us a chance to view what it means to be human through the introduction and reaction towards the other. As previously mentioned, within the series there are 4 examples of others shown. Of these 4, the homunculi are generally shown to be the most inhuman, despite being the closest beings to humans in terms of appearance and biological makeup. Initially, humanity is defined in terms of composition. In the first chapter, Edward Elric takes out a list and reads off the components. He then reveals, to the disgust of those around him, that humans are cheaply made before adding, well, it's like that myth about the hero. He made wings out of wax so he could fly, but when he got too close to the sun, to God, the wax melted and he crashed to the ground. Ed's remarks set up another conflict within the series, the ideological war between what a human can do and what humans should do. As the series progresses, it is revealed that more often than not, the monsters are created through the intervention of humans. These monsters are a mixture of both innocent victims and willing participants, and generally, they are still seen as people to pity or empathize with. This is set up by the reactions of the protagonists as the monsters reveal their stories, forcing the reader to feel sympathetic towards the other, which, in the case of Fullmetal Alchemist, the other is more often than not a body horror creation of alchemical science. The other is tragic, and the humans who create them are the monsters. Of these creations, none of them are more horrifying and lamentable than Nina. One of the first stops on the Elric brothers' journey to find more information about bioalchemy was the home of Sho Tucker, the Sewing Life alchemist. Sho Tucker is a renowned alchemist noted for his creation of a talking chimera, which at this point in the series is considered the cutting edge of alchemical science. The chimera, however, could only say one thing: "I want to die." The brothers take this in stride and decide to spend time at the Tucker house to research. While working in his library, the two brothers often take breaks to play with his dog and daughter. The little girl, Nina, often comments to the brothers about how her mother abandoned her, and how her father is often too busy working now to play with her. He is often seen in the dark, a worried expression on his face. The panels are given a streak of shadow across them, hinting at something ominous. The next day the Elric brothers come to visit Tucker. He reveals that he's done it again. He's created a talking chimera. Tucker invites the chimera to speak, introducing the brothers. The chimera says, "Edward." Then, to Ed's shock, it says, "Big brother." Ed realizes that Tucker has done the unspeakable. He has created a chimera from his daughter and dog, just like he had 2 years prior with his wife. In this scenario, Nina's new chimera form isn't seen as monstrous, but rather heartbreaking, while her creator is a Dr. Frankenstein. He shows no remorse for the destruction of his daughter, and says to Nina that people don't understand his work. He sees himself as the victim, not Nina, and rebukes Ed for not seeing things his way, commenting that Ed is the same for trying to resurrect his mother. To everyone else observing the situation, Sho is the monster and Nina is the victim. Even Scar, a Punisher-like character who is known specifically for killing only state alchemists and those who are in the military, not innocents, decides to kill Nina out of mercy rather than let her exist as an experiment. Perhaps the most tragic part of this scene is the reaction from Nina. She is forced to watch Scar kill her father. She starts to cry when she realizes what happened, revealing that she is still very much a little human girl, despite her form. It is after that Scar almost tenderly rubs her head and says, "How awful. Now that he's done this to you, there's no way to change you back. At the very least, go in peace." It is a sober moment. The earlier menacing style of Scar's art is replaced by something almost sad, as he's drawn with a streak of blood running down his cheek like tears. The case of Nina is a clean one. The monster was the human Sho, and Nina was the victim. What about some other monsters, though, in Fullmetal Alchemist? What about the murderers, Barry the Chopper and the Slicer brothers, who were on death row before the government decided to use them for alchemical experiments? Like Alphonse Elric, Barry the Chopper and the Slicer brothers are souls existing without a body, and they were ordered by the government and by extension, the homunculi, to guard a facility that was previously used to create Philosopher's Stones. They were murderers. There is no denying that, while they were alive, they were bad men. Barry the Chopper notably takes pride in talking about the people he butchered, and loves to tell the story to anyone he meets. The Slicer brothers, while they don't take pride in what they did necessarily, don't appear to regret it either. In the manga, both of the Elric brothers realize relatively quickly that they are fighting living armored beings rather than humans wearing armor. In both instances, once the truth has been revealed, the conversations that the brothers have with the criminals force them to define their current definition of human. For Al, it becomes a case of trying to define what he is and whether or not he even existed. As Barry the Chopper says, "What the hell is a soul anyway? How can you prove it exists when you can't even see it? Maybe your big brother and the people around you are all lying to you. Think about it. What proof do you have that this human you claim to be ever existed? Where is your meat? For me, that's easy. I kill, therefore I am." This causes a crisis for Al. How can he prove that he ever existed? This is a valid question to ask in this universe, especially since, as Al points out, memories are just data. There's no way to prove they weren't simply made. The homunculi, for instance, were made from nothing. They had no prior bodies to draw from, yet somehow they all have a personality. This potentially could come from the most dominant soul in their Philosopher's Stone, as Raph points out later in the series. But at the time of Al's crisis, he is unaware of the fact that the homunculi were living off of Philosopher's Stones. For the homunculi, it seems to boil down to, "I think, therefore I am." And therefore, the brothers come to the conclusion that anything that could potentially have a sentient human soul shouldn't be killed. Ed's fight with the Slicer brothers, and later the homunculus pride, solidifies the Elric brothers' definition of human. Ed has a very strict moral compass and won't kill a human despite being a human weapon. For him, humans fall under an umbrella, and he generally seems to show compassion to anything that has the potential to be kind, empathetic, or unable to fight back. To do so would be murder, With the Slicer brothers, he refuses to finish the job by destroying their blood seal, which is what binds their soul to the mortal plane. One of the Slicer brothers asks how he can consider them to be human still, despite their current form and history. Ed replies, "If I were to accept that you guys aren't human, then I would be saying that I don't consider my brother human either. My brother is human, and so are you guys. I'm not going to kill you." The Slicer brothers find this humorous, noting that the one time they're finally seen as human is when they're not really human any longer. Like Nina, the death of the Slicer brothers shortly after this conversation is seen as tragic and somewhat horrifying, as their murderer, one of the homunculi, has to be told to stop stabbing the blood seal on the armor because it's already dead. The drastically contracted reaction of Ed's unconcealed horror and the homunculus's lack of care sets up the scale of human. It suggests that monsters and the other can be seen as human, despite their current form, and the things they might have done in life. Likewise, it forces the reader to put the homunculi on the bottom of this newly defined scale. I've mentioned the homunculi quite a few times now, and I set them at the bottom of the humanity versus monster scale, based on the reactions and definitions of the series' protagonists. But what happens when even the truest monster doesn't fit neatly into this newly defined scale? The reader has just gotten this seemingly solid definition settled into their worldview, and then Arakawa introduces the homunculus greed. Right from the beginning, the reader is set up to think that greed is just as bad as the other homunculi. He kidnaps Alphonse while Edward is away and demands to know the secrets of his body in order to become truly immortal. Arakawa draws him looking directly out of the panel at the reader with a crazed expression in his eyes as he states, as his name implies, that he is greedy. He often introduces himself by stating that he wants everything and that everything he owns, including his henchmen, are his property, which is why he takes offense to anyone who harms his men. For all of this avarice, though, he is surprisingly protective of his companions, which consist of a group of humanoid chimeras that were experiments of the government. Before greed is properly introduced, his gang tells Alphonse their story of how they were in the Civil War and agreed to be experimented on after being grievously injured in war. They are incredibly loyal to Greed because he took them in and accepted them, people who would otherwise have been rejected as monsters. When the homunculus Wrath invades their hideout in an attempt to wipe them all out under the guise of rescuing Alphonse, Greed goes out of his way to try to protect his henchmen. He could have run away, but instead, when he finds out that they've been butchered by Wrath, he becomes angry, shouting that Wrath destroyed his property. Like with Nina's death, their deaths are seen as tragic, and even Greed's eventual capture and death isn't seen as something good, despite the fact that Ed fought him just a few chapters earlier. Greed, unlike the other homunculi, is shown as being compassionate, and at the very end of the manga after his rebirth, selfless after he sacrifices himself to save his new vessel. Of all the homunculi, he shows the most potential for being human. Even Wrath, who is a homunculus made from a human body, doesn't show this level of compassion towards his subordinates. It could be argued that this compassion is simply his way of showing his dominance over his possessions. But when Greed murders one of his old subordinates after his rebirth leaves him with amnesia, he feels a massive amount of inner turmoil and regret that he can't explain, until his host forces him to acknowledge that he did genuinely care about those who served under him. More often than not, humanity is shown to be the true monster in Fullmetal Alchemist. Soph Kimberly, like Tucker, is one of the more horrifying humans in the series. He willingly serves the homunculi out of a desire to see the new world they hope to create, and because he enjoys killing. He isn't the only human serving the homunculi, but he appears to be the only one not serving them out of a desire for physical or political power, or out of self-preservation. Like Tucker, he comes off as charismatic and friendly to those who are unaware of his homicidal past, which sets him up as a wolf in sheep's clothing, unlike the monsters in the series who have to prove their inner humanity. Arakawa's art style lends to this concept of not judging a character based on appearance. Her art has a rounded, soft feeling to it, despite the violent and oftentimes gruesome content. Her line weight generally doesn't fluctuate too much between characters, and the villains don't have harsh faces. At a casual glance, if a reader were to contrast Scar to Kimberly, the harsher, blockier style of Scar might indicate he's more of a villain than Kimberly, but that isn't the case. Likewise, many of the homunculi are drawn with softer faces and bodies. Gluttony, who is downright horrifying with his eating habits, is actually kinda cute looking with his round body and baby-like face. This style isn't due to Arakawa being limited with her art either. She often transforms characters with the placement of shadows, favoring the technique of something akin to a tapetum lucidum effect with the character's eyes glowing in the shadows. She also elongates the cute features, such as making Gluttony's smile uncomfortably wide with an emphasis on his teeth. The characters of Pride and the original form of Father use this technique as well. By playing on stylistic expectations, she can further emphasize her point on not judging a character based on whether they are arbitrarily labeled as human or other. This portrayal and constant fluctuation on the scale of what is human and what is monster or other forces the reader to consider each new case as it comes. Preconceived definitions have to be reevaluated. By making the reader change their definition each time they're confronted with a new human or other, Arakawa shows that it isn't necessarily a being's appearance or origin that determines their moral compass. Even those literally born out of sin, such as the case of greed, can have good in them, something that the Elric brothers determine time and time again. She also acknowledges that characters have the ability to confront their inhumanity and change, by not judging others arbitrarily by their physical label, and rather by their potential for good. Arakawa shows that kindness and empathy are the key factors in deciding what it is to be human.